There is a certain romance to the sky, a clean, boundless cathedral where battles are fought with grace and precision, far from the mud and blood of the trenches below. We imagine heroes in these skies, knights of the modern age, their steeds forged from aluminum and powered by thunder. They climb, they duel, they conquer, and if they fall, we picture them slipping the surly bonds of earth in a final fiery blaze of glory. It's a clean narrative, a heroic one. But what happens when the story doesn't end there? What happens when the hero falls from that celestial arena back to the cruel, complicated earth? What happens when his greatest enemy isn't the pilot in the opposing cockpit, but the hatred waiting for him on the ground? The story of Fletcher Eugene Adams, one of America's great flying aces of the Second World War, is not the clean, simple story we like to tell. It's a story of incredible skill and breathtaking courage, yes, but it's also the story of a horrific crime, a forgotten footnote in the annals of war that reveals a much darker truth about the price of victory. This is the story of an ace who conquered the sky, only to be murdered on the ground. To understand the man, you have to understand the world that forged him. Fletcher Eugene Adams was born on August 2, 1921, in the small, quiet town of Palestine, Texas. This was an America caught in a strange limbo. The roaring 20s were giving way to the hushed desperation of the Great Depression. It was a time of immense hardship, but also one of profound innovation and soaring dreams. For a boy growing up in landlocked Texas, the biggest dream of all was taking flight. The air was electric with the legend of Charles Lindbergh. Pilots were more than just operators of machines. They were pioneers, adventurers, the very embodiment of American ingenuity and daring. Every time the drone of an engine passed overhead, heads would turn, and for a moment, people would forget the dust and the debt and look to the limitless possibility of the sky. This was the world that captured Fletcher's imagination. He wasn't born into wealth or privilege. He was the son of a railroad man, Fletcher Sr., and his wife, Mary. His was a typical American upbringing, grounded in hard work and community, but his gaze was always tilted upward. As the 1930s wore on, a distant storm was gathering across the Atlantic. In Europe, ideologies were clashing, armies were mobilizing, and the slow, ominous drumbeat of war was growing louder. For most Americans, it was a foreign problem, a distant echo in the Sunday newsreels. But for a generation of young men like Fletcher Adams, it was becoming the backdrop to their adolescence, the inescapable context of their future. They were coming of age with the sobering realization that their world, the world of small towns and simple dreams, was about to be irrevocably changed. When the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor shattered America's illusion of isolation on December 7, 1941, Fletcher was just 20 years old. The call to duty was no longer an abstract concept. It was a deafening roar. And for a young man who had spent his life dreaming of the sky, there was only one place he was meant to be. Like thousands of others, Fletcher Adams answered the call. He enlisted in the United States Army Air Forces, entering the Aviation Cadet Program, a grueling competitive pipeline designed to turn farm boys, mechanics, and college kids into the world's most formidable pilots. The training was a baptism by fire. It started with the slow, rickety primary trainers, like the PT-19, their open cockpits exposing cadets to the raw elements. Here they learned the fundamentals, the delicate dance of stick and rudder. Instructors were harsh, demanding perfection. The washout rate was brutal. Every flight could be your last in the program. From there, it was on to the more powerful basic and advanced trainers, the Vultee BT-13 vibrator, and the legendary AT-6 Texan, the pilot maker. With each step, the speed increased, the complexity grew, and the boy from Palestine, Texas, was honed into a weapon. He learned formation flying, aerobatics, gunnery, and navigation. He mastered the art of controlling a powerful, temperamental machine as if it were an extension of his own body. He wasn't just learning a skill, he was undergoing a complete transformation. On September 6, 1943, he earned his wings. Second Lieutenant Fletcher E. Adams was now an officer and a pilot in the USAAF. His dream had been realized, but the dream was just a prelude to the nightmare of war. His destination was the European theater of operations, the most dangerous sky in the world. He was assigned to the 364th Fighter Squadron, a component of the 357th Fighter Group. This was no ordinary unit. Stationed at RAF Leiston in Suffolk, England, the 357th would soon earn a legendary, almost fearsome reputation. They called themselves the Oxford Boys, a nod to a nearby village. They were a cocky, aggressive, and exceptionally talented group of pilots, and they were about to be handed America's brand new thoroughbred warhorse, the P-51 Mustang. The P-51 Mustang was a game changer, with its powerful Rolls-Royce Merlin engine and immense fuel capacity. It could escort heavy bombers like the B-17 Flying Fortress and B-24 Liberator all the way to Berlin and back. Before the Mustang, bomber crews were left to fend for themselves deep inside Germany, where they were slaughtered by the Luftwaffe. The Oxford Boys and their P-51s were the cavalry, arriving just in time. For a new pilot like Fletcher Adams, stepping into this world was intimidating. He was surrounded by veterans, men who had already tasted combat. The English air base was a world away from Texas, a place of Nissen huts, damp fog, and the constant thrumming tension of a base at war. The missions were long, grueling, and terrifying. They would climb to over 30,000 feet, where the cold was so intense it could freeze a man's skin to the canopy. For hours they would scan the vast empty sky, their eyes straining for the tiny black specks that could mean life or death. The enemy they faced, the German Luftwaffe, was experienced, battle-hardened, and fighting over their own home turf. Adams flew his first combat missions in the winter of early 1944. It was a brutal introduction, but he was a quick study. He possessed a natural talent, a calm demeanor under pressure, and what pilots called situational awareness, an almost sixth sense for the three-dimensional chaos of a dogfight. His moment arrived on February 11th, 1944. During a bomber escort mission near Frankfurt, the 357th engaged a large formation of German fighters. In the swirling, frantic melee, Adams latched onto a Messerschmitt Bf 109. He closed the distance, his hands steady, his training taking over. A burst from his 6.50 caliber machine guns tore into the enemy aircraft. It faltered, smoked, and then plunged towards the earth. It was his first confirmed kill. On the same mission, he found another German fighter, a Focke-Wulf 190, and sent it down as well. In a single day, Fletcher Adams had gone from a rookie to a double victor. He had proven he belonged. The kills started to mount. On February 20th, he shot down another Bf 109, but it was on March 6, 1944, that Fletcher Adams cemented his place in the annals of fighter aces. The target for the bombers that day was Berlin itself. It was the first major daylight raid on the German capital, a symbolic and incredibly dangerous mission. The Luftwaffe threw everything they had at the American bomber stream. The sky over Germany became a sprawling, chaotic battlefield. For the Oxford Boys, it was their finest hour. They claimed 28 enemy aircraft that day. In the midst of this epic battle, Fletcher Adams, the quiet Texan, was a whirlwind of deadly efficiency. He shot down a BF-109, then another. With that fifth victory, he became an ace, a title of honor and respect that set a pilot apart. It was a milestone every fighter pilot dreamed of, but few achieved. Back at Leaston, there was a tradition. A newly minted ace was celebrated, his achievement toasted. It was a brief, joyous moment in the relentless grind of war. But the war didn't stop for celebrations. Adams kept flying, and he kept winning. March 16th, another BF-109. March 18th, a Focke-Wulf 190. April 13th, his eighth victory, another BF-109. Just over 2 months after his first kill, he was one of the leading aces in his squadron. He flew a P-51B Mustang that he named Southern Belle, a tribute to his roots. He was no longer the new kid. He was a seasoned veteran, a leader in the sky, a man his wingmen trusted with their lives. His ninth and final victory came on April 24th, 1944. He destroyed a Focke-Wulf 190 near Munich. 9 enemy aircraft confirmed destroyed. He was one of the most successful pilots in the entire 8th Air Force. He was just 22 years old. But the scoreboard, the tally of victories, tells only one part of the story. Who was the man inside the cockpit of Southern Belle? By all accounts, Fletcher Adams was not a loud, boisterous figure. He wasn't the stereotypical, swaggering ace of Hollywood films. Fellow pilots described him as quiet, calm, and intensely focused. His coolness in the chaos of a dogfight was legendary. While others might be shouting on the radio, Adams would be a steady, reassuring voice. He was a professional in the deadliest profession on earth. Like all soldiers, he lived a life of stark contrasts. One moment he was locked in a life-or-death struggle at 30,000 feet. The next, he was back at the mess hall at Leaston, sharing a joke with his friends, writing a letter home to his parents in Texas. Imagine the weight of those letters. How do you describe what you do? How do you convey the terror and the exhilaration without terrifying your mother and father? The letters were heavily censored, of course. Pilots couldn't mention locations, missions, or losses, so they wrote about the mundane, the English weather, the food, the hope that it would all be over soon. They filled the pages with reassurances, with love, with a desperate longing for a normal life they weren't sure they would ever see again. There's a little-known detail that speaks volumes about the bonds forged in that environment. In the 357th, there was an informal tradition. When an ace was crowned, he would be presented with a bottle of Vat 69 Scotch by the group's intelligence officer. We know Adams became an ace on March 6th. One can imagine that quiet, perhaps slightly shy young man being clapped on the back by his comrades, sharing a drink that tasted of victory and fleeting survival. These small human moments were the anchors that kept these men sane. They were a brotherhood, bound not just by a shared uniform and a shared mission, but by a shared understanding of the precariousness of their own existence. Each morning they would watch friends take off, and some evenings they would stare at an empty bunk, a stark reminder of the odds. By late May of 1944, the tide of the war had turned. The Normandy invasion was just days away. The Allied air forces were systematically dismantling the Third Reich's ability to wage war, striking factories, rail yards, and airfields deep inside Germany. The missions were as dangerous as ever. The Luftwaffe was crippled but not dead, and German anti-aircraft fire, the dreaded flak, was thicker and more accurate than ever. On May 30th, 1944, a mission was scheduled to escort bombers to attack aircraft factories near Sorau, Germany, in what is now modern-day Poland. It was a long, deep penetration mission. Captain Fletcher E. Adams, now a flight leader, was scheduled to fly. He had already completed his combat tour. With 9 victories and countless missions under his belt, He had more than done his duty. He could have accepted a rotation home to a safe job as an instructor. He could have gone back to Texas. But that wasn't Fletcher Adams. His squadron was short on experienced leaders, and he refused to leave his men. It was a testament to his character, his sense of responsibility. He suited up, climbed into his P-51, and led his flight into the sky one more time. Deep over Germany, they were engaged by enemy fighters. As he had done 9 times before, Adams dove into the fray. He was a protector, drawing the fire of the German fighters away from the vulnerable bombers. In the ensuing dogfight, he was locked in a battle with a Focke-Wulf 190. The details of the fight are lost to the chaos of war, but the outcome is not. Adams' P-51 was hit, critically damaged, the engine failing, Southern Belle began to fall from the sky. This is the moment where the heroic narrative should end. The ace pilot, shot down in a valiant dogfight over enemy territory. A clean death in combat. But Fletcher Adams did not die in his cockpit. He managed to bail out. His parachute blossomed in the German sky, and he floated down to earth alive. Wounded, perhaps, but alive. He was now a prisoner of war. Under the Geneva Convention, he was entitled to humane treatment. He was an officer, an enemy combatant who had fought honorably, and he should have been taken into custody by the German military. But Fletcher Adams did not land in the hands of soldiers. He landed in a world that had been poisoned by years of relentless, vicious propaganda. Joseph Goebbels' ministry had spent years portraying Allied airmen not as soldiers, but as Terrorflieger, terror flyers, gangsters of the air, murderers who delighted in bombing women and children. A new ugly term had entered the German lexicon, Fliegermord, flyer, murder. It was an unofficial but widely understood sentiment, encouraged from the highest levels of the Nazi regime, that airmen who bailed out were fair game. They were to be shown no mercy. When Captain Adams landed, he was quickly captured, not by Wehrmacht soldiers, but by local civilians and Nazi Party officials. He was taken to the town of Chollen, near the Elbe River. What happened next is a matter of sworn testimony, uncovered after the war by Allied investigators. The story is chilling and strips away any romance about the nature of conflict. Adams was held in the village. He was a prisoner, defenseless. A local Nazi official, a man named Alois Eisel, who was the district leader of the party, took charge. According to witnesses at a post-war trial, Eisel addressed a crowd that had gathered. He declared that the captured pilot was a terror flyer and that he would not be leaving the town alive. Adams was paraded a trophy of war. He was then marched to a wooded area just outside the village. There, on the orders of Alois Eisel, Fletcher Adams was murdered. He was shot in the back of the neck. The celebrated ace, the protector of the bombers, the quiet hero from Texas, was executed in cold blood. His body was hastily buried in an unmarked grave. Back at RAF Leaston, he was simply listed as missing in action. His parents in Palestine, Texas, received the dreaded telegram. For months and then for years, they held on to the sliver of hope that he was a prisoner of war, that one day he would come home. They knew nothing of the dark, horrifying truth. When the war ended, the U.S. Army began the monumental task of accounting for its missing men. The case of Fletcher Adams was one of thousands, but investigators from the War Crimes Group were persistent. They followed leads, interviewed German civilians and former officials. The story of the captured American flyer in Chollen began to surface. Whispers turned into leads, and leads into damning testimony. Investigators eventually found the man who had ordered the murder, Alois Eisel. He was put on trial by an American military tribunal at Dachau in 1947. Witnesses testified to his role in the killing. They recounted his inflammatory speech, his direct order to have the unarmed pilot killed. Isil was found guilty of violating the laws of war and was sentenced to death. The sentence was later commuted, and he was eventually released, a point of controversy that still rankles historians. But the trial established the truth of what had happened. Even more importantly, investigators were led to the location of Adams's hidden grave. His remains were exhumed and positively identified. After 3 long years of being missing, Captain Fletcher Eugene Adams was finally found. The boy who had dreamed of the sky was no longer lost. The historical significance of Fletcher Adams' story extends far beyond his 9 victories. His murder represents a brutal, often overlooked aspect of the Second World War. The Fliegermord phenomenon was not an isolated incident. Hundreds of downed Allied airmen are believed to have been lynched or summarily executed by civilians or party officials on the ground. These acts were a direct consequence of a state-sponsored campaign of dehumanization. It serves as a terrifying reminder of how propaganda can erode the fundamental rules of war and turn ordinary people into killers. The story of Fletcher Adams forces us to confront an uncomfortable reality. We prefer our wars to have clear lines, our heroes to have glorious deaths. Adams's life and death defy that simplicity. He was a hero in the truest sense, brave, skilled, and selfless, volunteering for one last mission he didn't have to fly. His significance lies not only in the enemies he defeated in the air, but in the truth his death reveals about the enemy on the ground, an enemy fueled by a desperate, fanatical ideology that saw no distinction between a soldier and a murderer. His story reminds us that the deepest cruelties of war are often not found in the heat of battle, but in the cold-blooded moments that follow. Fletcher Eugene Adams was laid to rest at the Ardennes American Cemetery in Belgium. His final resting place is Plot D, Row 12, Grave 43. He lies among thousands of his countrymen, each with their own story of sacrifice. For years, his name was also inscribed on the Wall of the Missing at the Cambridge American Cemetery in England, a placeholder for a hero whose fate was unknown. The discovery of his body and the confirmation of his murder allowed for a rosette to be placed next to his name, indicating he was no longer missing. He had been found. There is no grand, uplifting moral to a story like this. There is only a profound sense of tragedy and a deep, abiding respect for the man at its center. Fletcher Adams was a product of his time, a small-town boy who reached for the sky and became one of the best. He flew through the fire and chaos of the world's greatest conflict, only to be consumed by a quiet, hateful act of violence far from the battlefield. His story is not just a tale of aerial victories. It is a solemn lesson about the fragility of honor in the face of fanaticism. It reminds us that the true cost of war is measured not only in the grand battles, but in the individual lives cut short, in the dreams that never had a chance to be realized after the uniform came off. The legacy of Captain Fletcher Adams is a dual one, a celebration of the almost superhuman skill of a fighter ace, and a grim testament to the very human capacity for hatred. He remains a symbol of the ultimate sacrifice, a sacrifice made not in a blaze of glory in the sky, but alone and defenseless, on the cold, hard ground of his enemy. And that is a story that should never be forgotten.